Kelly Lamb, I'm the branch manager of the Vancouver Community Library, and I want to welcome all of you tonight and thank you for your patience. Tonight's program is Hate Speech, Who Benefits? And this is the second program in the series, Defining and Responding to Hate Speech, presented to you by Circle of Peace. The vision of Fort Vancouver Regional Libraries is that everyone recognizes and values libraries as an essential element of a free society. Our goal is to build community connections by providing a neutral environment for people to come together to learn and discuss differing viewpoints and issues in a spirit of respect and discovery. I am pleased to introduce our facilitator for this evening, Shireen El-Kashari. Shireen is a graduate of WSU with a bachelor's in social science. He started his work as a political activist with the anti-war movements, and he is a volunteer for the Clark County Public Health Ethics Community. His everyday job is as an IT professional. He's going to tell you a little bit more about himself, and we welcome you. Thank you all.
Yeah, don't let my boss hear about that one. It's not good. And she's right there in the audience. So if the slides are a little messed up, we had to export the PowerPoint, or it was a keynote into PowerPoint, into Google Slides, and then finally there. So excuse the bit of mess, but I actually got my start in the anti-war movement. I was my activism at that time was just yelling at the TV, and some very wise people in my community grabbed me and said, you really can't do that. You've got to come down. So I lived outside of DC, and so I ended up just protesting like lots of wars. Didn't really organize, didn't know what to do. I just would be like a guy yelling and carrying a sign. Like, carry the sign, do something. I do a bunch of different political things, but I won't go into tons of detail on that. The other thing too is I wanted to recognize like the rest of like the Circle of Peace group that I work with, and so this is I guess co-facilitated by the Circle of Peace, and I've posted their names on the right side there. And I also want to thank them. During the last discussion with Michael and Angela, they were very good about sharing their progress and using like things like Google Slides so we could all see what they were doing. And I work completely in the dark, and I think they saw this presentation at 3 o'clock today, so there's a lot of trust there. So thank you guys for that. Appreciate that. If you didn't make it to last week's meeting, it was really good. It was hosted by Michael and Angela, and they went into like what hate speech is, and they delved into like the legal ramifications of hate speech. Is it allowed? And so if you didn't see it, it's on our Circle of Peace website, so definitely check that out. So it's circleofpeaceonline.org. Okay, so if I look back at the screen, it's because I'm not used to this computer, and I'm also looking at my notes on a different computer. And so I'm going to assert something tonight. A lot of this is based on research that I've done. A lot of it is taking a lot of books, a lot of talks, and pulling together the pieces. And so my assertion is not only are movements around hate speech very scary, they could actually be quite lucrative. And I'll go into like really technical detail on that, like the way an IT person should, and not like the way an IT person should set up a slideshow. And I also want to, before I throw anyone under the bus, I do want to say one thing. The leaders of these movements, I call out. The followers, I call out a lot, but I have to give them some leeway. In a lot of the cases, these guys really do feel like they're doing the right thing. You have people that they really respect in their community saying these things, and they don't really question this until something affects them personally. They have to run into like a Muslim person or someone who's gay or something before they open their eyes. And so these guys, in many regards, do feel like they're saving the country. And so I had like a cool build on this slide, but that's okay. So the first group of people that benefit, so like the whole topic, and if I digress from the topic, feel free to keep me straight. And I actually wanted to throw out one other thing I forgot, is that you're free to throw your hand up. You can ask a question during the presentation. I'd love to make it like a little bit back and forth. You don't have to wait till the end, but we'll have a long Q&A at the end. I'm not an expert, so I might end up calling someone else like from the Circle of Peace to answer your question, but feel free to interrupt me at any time. But the first group, irresponsible politicians, the reason why their benefit of hate speech is really dangerous is that they have the ability to distance themselves from their followers. Wow, that's a fan of mine. I didn't tell them to do anything. They're the ones that flipped that car over or burned the whatever or hurt those people. I would never have condoned something like that. This I don't see it as much in the US as I see it overseas, but it's a super scary thing. As a matter of fact, I've been in parts of the Middle East where there are followers that are real followers, and then there's like undercover police followers, and the undercover police followers in those places, like they call them thugs. In America, we call them agent provocateurs, and they can make a movement look really bad, including like movements that we would think are good. Religious leaders love to use hate speech to make their religion like the only one that works in a city, country, globe, planet. Racists and bigots, they benefit because they create movements, and that's like the whole topic of tonight. So I'm going to get into movements. I'll spend like way too much time on movements, but that's kind of like who benefits from hate speech. Terrorists, you can recruit. If your life is eminently at risk, you will be moved to action, and that's what terrorists use. And so on to movements. And again, my IT skills are failing. There we go. So I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but look at B, a series of organized activities working toward an objective, and that's what a movement is. So it could be a very loose thing. And so here's where I talk about the way a movement used to be built and the way it's built now. And this is like one place where technology, other than presenting slides, is bad. You guys probably won't believe a single word that I say about this next slide, but does anyone here, show of hands, know what the Toynbee tiles are? Okay, so my wife Kristen raised her hand because I'm such a nut, and she's like, yeah, thanks to you, I know what this is. So this is like a really interesting story, and I use it to kind of outline like how a movement can start. I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia, and it's from the 80s. You can go into D.C., Pennsylvania, New York, anywhere on the East Coast, and you would just see this tile on the street. You could see it on a highway, like in a place where you never could cross it on foot. 60 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour. This would be like in the middle of the highway. It would be on sidewalks, everywhere, and it was pervasive. And it got to the point where major newspapers on the East Coast like covered this phenomena, and it got so pervasive. There's a documentary about it, and so it's actually harder to watch this documentary. It's harder to find. It was on Netflix for a while, but long story short, and I don't want to give away the movie because you should watch it yourself. But this was the person who put these tiles out was so desperate to get their message out, and he actually ended up not being mentally all there, but he was so desperate to get his message out that he literally took the time to put these tiles out. And the methodology of how he did it is absolutely fascinating. And so this was a guy trying to create a movement, and he was reduced to like putting these tiles all over the place, and it wasn't for probably 20 years after the fact that like anyone understood what it meant. So it was very interesting. All right, so this slide doesn't show as well. When early movements, so again, more of my assertion, early movements you really had to love what you were doing. You had to really believe in it. Your newsletter was something like that, which you typed on a typewriter. For the younger kids, it's this thing that if you make a mistake while you're typing, you have to start over if you don't want any mistakes on it. And it was really slow, and when you type, like the keyboard would get stuck because you were doing it too fast. And so you really had to believe in the movement. You had to be face-to-face with people, you had to meet people, and you had to gather in physical spaces to create your movement. And so your newsletter would look like that, and that would probably take you 5 hours to put together with no typos. And so just keep that in mind as we keep going. And so on my notes on the left side, and again, go ahead.
I'm gathering from what you're saying that you're presupposing that the people involved in the movement are adults.
There's actually been movements. So this newsletter, so I was just looking for like typewritten things. This was a college newsletter, so I don't know if we consider that.
Well, I'm thinking about young children who go with their parents and are subsequently indoctrinated and have no reason to question
Right.
the validity of what they have been told in these processes.
Yeah, absolutely. So like this part of the presentation, it really gets around the idea that if you were starting a movement once upon a time, like in the past, there wasn't a lot of fame and recognition for you for a long time. And you'll see, like when I contrast it with modern day movements, why that's something I mention. So if you hang out with me a little bit longer, I'll pull that in. And I wish this showed up a little bit better. Bear with me one sec, because there's a lot of stats on that slide. So this is like the actual stats from a YouTube channel that's actually doing okay. What you're looking at there, the numbers aren't super clear, but you're looking at 197,000 minutes of watch time. And that 197,000 minutes of watch time sounds like an incredible amount of time, but if you do the math, it could be 1,000 people watching 397 minutes of footage. The math, I'm just going to round it. Or if it's 1,000 people, it's 1,000 people watching 14 minutes of any video. And so your average video is usually more than 15 minutes. And the idea that we have these portable devices and we could bring them anywhere we want, having a certain person watched for 14 minutes a month it's very easy to do. Second point on this one is if your content is being watched and it's not like the daily news, meaning that it's not irrelevant like the next month, like if it's, and I'm Muslim, so I'll make fun of it, Muslims are invading, that's always going to be relevant for a while. So if it's not made irrelevant because it's yesterday's news, you're like a book author on YouTube. You'll continue to make, that's $200. That's $200. That's 20 hours at $10 an hour. It's substantial, and you'll get it every month if the same people see like a referral to the site. And YouTube will give you the demographic data for this, and so you will know this is like better than any Nielsen rating. So you will know that these are 23-year-old females that came to you by way of X, their hobbies are this, and that's because we submit that data into Facebook and Google. And so they actually extract this. And so as a content creator, so if you're on YouTube, you're called a content creator, you can start honing and refining that message to keep that audience coming back. And so that $200, it's like a residual, like an author of a book. It's very powerful. If you, so here's the dangerous part about it. This is like where I let people into like the crazy mind that is Shireen, and you'll say, why did we come to this guy's lecture? It's so weird. The thing about YouTube in these movements is it's not hard to do that crazy branding that the big companies do. You can go up to any, and so I got sucked into this. That's actually my car on the left, actually before I sold it. You can go up to any Land Rover guy that really loves his Land Rover and go, what's the percentage of Land Rovers on the road since 1948? And he'll be like, it's over 70%. Guaranteed they'll know the answer. Well, maybe I shouldn't say guaranteed, but there's a really good chance. And when you drive one of these cars, you fight with Toyota guys. You're like, man, yes, your Toyota's more reliable, but this will last longer. Yes, this leaks everything, everywhere, every time it rains, but it's still better than your Toyota, even though your Toyota's like way more reliable. And so that branding, the fact that you can have like an unreliable car like this, and people are really fighting, this is the stuff of like legendary marketing. This is brand creation. And so when you start creating these movements, I started hearing the same rhetoric from the guys that fell into these hate movements. I could go up to any of them and say, hey, I'm Muslim, why do you hate me? And they're like, creeping Sharia, or, just they've got their words, and it's scary because it's uniformly, said to me. And I'm like, well, look, okay, creeping Sharia, that sounds like a really bad thing. Give me a state bill that's going through your state, House or Senate right now that falls into it. And you get crickets. Is there some federal law that's going through that's like Sharia in there somehow? No answer. And so what I'm finding is that with this modern day tech, you can do this really crazy level of branding, and guys will buy stuff from the same place. They'll have similar haircuts. And if you look at like Land Rover guys, they, not like haircuts, but like everything else, they really stick with each other on. Hopefully I didn't go too far. So hopefully you guys can read the text in the boxes. In hindsight, I should have made it bigger. So the items, so look at it this way. YouTube is like the fulcrum in the middle. Not the fulcrum, it's like the target in the middle. The best way to explain this slide, let me explain it a different way, and then I'll go into the slide. So my first job out of college, I used to sell soap to car washes. And I just go up to the car wash like, hey, I sell soap, and would you buy it? Great. And so some of my biggest customers were those gas stations that had the car wash. And I was talking to a gas station owner, and I was like, you guys probably make a ton of money. You guys are rich. I don't know how much I'm on the road selling soap. I buy a ton of gas. And he would be like, Shireen, we sell gas for the same price we buy it for. We might add a penny to it. And we don't make any money on it. I'm like, well, then why would you be in this, stupid business? And they would tell me, look, and this is back in like the early 90s. They would say, look, we make $15,000 a month off of the convenience store. We make $15,000 a month off the gas station. So the gas brings you to my door, and then we sell you Snickers, and we run your car through the car wash, and that's where we make our money. And then the guys that had like the mechanic shop or the quick lube, those guys, that was like another revenue figure. So YouTube is the target. And as an online marketer, as a creator of a movement, a hate movement, you use all those tools up top: Facebook, online ads, Tumblr, Discord. Discord is where you can have like a mass live voice or text chat with a bunch of people. Twitter, it's microblogging. You could put out a thing, link it to your YouTube, and you can do some crazy powerful marketing like, hey, want to know why America's going to end in 4 years? Watch this video. Come on. Who's not going to click that link? And every time you click that link, you end up at YouTube. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on this slide. So there's a couple things about YouTube and Facebook. Are folks aware of how you make money on YouTube or Facebook?
No. Please tell us.
Okay.
I'm asking my son that, he can't tell me.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. Let me focus on YouTube because it's a bit more interesting. So on YouTube, you have two entities in that mix, right? You have YouTube and you have what are called content creators. So YouTube will tell you, like, we've killed ourselves to build you this amazing platform. You no longer need to submit your TV program to NBC or one of the TV networks so they can just laugh and not run your show. You provide the content, we'll give you a great platform to run it on. And when we do that, if you bring enough folks in, we're going to throw some ads that are relevant to your audience. We'll split that ad revenue with you. So the more ads that are played and watched by YouTube, the more money they make, the more the content creator makes. Which is interesting because it leads content creators to leave aside like factual stuff and spectacle. Spectacle's like way better selling. Like if you can, like if there's like any older brothers in the room, if you like took your sister and locked her in a dog kennel and put it on YouTube, yeah, that's like 100,000 views guaranteed. It's because it's spectacle. It's a terrible thing to do to your little sister, but it's like what attracts people. It's like what brings people there. So then it gets a little bit worse. So YouTube is saying, well, if I've got like this guy who's in the hate, and he hates like black people or Muslims or gay people, I don't want to really show him something he disagrees with because he's going to flip to something else. He's going to leave YouTube at that moment and go into a Facebook, or maybe he'll start looking at his Twitter, maybe he'll look at Reddit or email. So I need to really just give them a lot of the same. And so what you end up doing is you send people into kind of this echo chamber. And this echo chamber is you go to YouTube and you watch like an anti-Barack Obama video or anti-Hillary. And what they do is they have their content indexed so well and categorized. They're like, well, don't send this guy any anti-Trump stuff because you might lose him. So let's feed him a little bit more. And based on his watch time, it just keeps pumping that same content to you. It's kind of like if you go into a place and you've been eating there for years and they're like, hey, do you want the usual? And you're like, yeah, I'll take the usual, and they give it to you. They'd never like offer anything else. They don't want to like lose that client. And so it's the same thing in these. And now you're talking about, if you go into like any like IT publication or any IT news, they're talking about big data. And so big data is amazing for businesses, but it's like terrible for folks like us in that you can actually aggregate everything up there and you can start to pull very interesting relationships between folks that are going to the site, what they watch next, what they click, how much of the video did they watch, did they follow the whole commercial through. So with Nielsen, for those who know what Nielsen ratings are, that was kind of a survey. Nielsen ratings were like you were a Nielsen family and you filled out surveys like, yeah, we watched this TV, we watched this one. And you could watch a TV show that you were like, so if you were like watching like Keeping Up with the Kardashians, you would lie, right? You're like, no, I don't watch that crap. But you were like watching the heck out of it. And so, I mean, I would never admit to it. So with YouTube, you're stuck. They know. And if you go in with like a private browser, you're like, hey, mom and dad won't know, I'll go in with my private browser. They still type back to like what's called your IP address, like your internet address, which is like at your house. So they're like, well, we know this guy is at that IP address and this is a private browser, so we couldn't really figure out who it was, but it came from like the same house. And it was like at 10 o'clock at night, so it's probably a parent, it's not like the kid, unless the kid snuck the iPad under the blankets. True story. So they really can hone in on like who's doing what when. So then that's data, right? So they're gathering data on you. But there's something worse than data, and that's metadata. What is metadata? Metadata is data about your data. And so where you were, what time it was, what the device was. This guy doesn't watch political stuff from this laptop because that's his work laptop, but his iPad, yeah, send all that anti-Barack Obama stuff all day, or that anti-Trump stuff. He'll eat it up for hours. And for every time he's eating it up, we're showing our ad revenue, we're making more money, we're charging our sponsors, or our advertisers, we're showing their ads, we're making more money. And when we can go back to the advertiser and say, your ad was in front of 1 million people who watched the entire ad for 30 seconds. it's really hard to refute that. And so they pay more. And so I guess the long-winded version of this is that you end up in an echo chamber. It doesn't give credence to alternative opinions. It doesn't give like an argument, and it really feeds us. And you get to the point where you think the whole world agrees with this, and then you start agreeing with it, and you're like, well, there's really no other way this could be. So, maybe an educated person, they go somewhere like the library, find out, the truth, grab some books about it. But it's so easy to just let it play. When you set up, if you go to YouTube without altering the settings, it's got autoplay is like enabled by default, and so it just plays video after video. There's some interesting case studies out there. It was programming for kids. They put these really weird videos on, and it just kind of fascinated children. It was like this, if you guys heard of like these Elsa videos, the autoplay would stay in that genre, and some of these guys were making millions of dollars on YouTube, and it was just this algorithm would lock kids in, autoplay was on, and it would just run. And these types of videos, I've actually traveled overseas, talked to like my small cousins, and they're like, hey, look at this video. And I'm like, holy, you know what? That's like an American thing. It's so weird. So I kind of hammered that point a little bit too much. So when you have this fulcrum going to YouTube, now is where like the crazy part of it comes. So you've got the ad revenue, and advertisers are getting a little bit more picky about where they put their ads. So if you're doing hate speech, Pepsi's probably not going to advertise with you. And so they started culling back their advertising spend, and then YouTube is like, well, we're not going to run Pepsi ads on like a hate thing. But there are things that will appeal, and that, folks that don't care, they'll run their ads there. So content creators, like the gas station, are like, well, that's okay. I've got this captive audience now, so what do I do? Going from kind of left, so the top is how you flow traffic to YouTube. The bottom is like what you do with that traffic. So first box is conferences. So if you get popular enough, you can have what's called a con. Hey, my YouTube fans, I have 360,000 subscribers. We're meeting in Portland at this venue, and you can personally meet me there because now I've become famous and I'm kind of a demigod. And I'll sign your autographs. It's only $5 to get in. I'll be selling my books. And so now you've got distribution of books. You've got face-to-face contact. And the folks that have this content, they're not slouches. They're good speakers. They know what they're doing, I guess, is the trick. Second box is merchandise. Buy my T-shirt. Buy my mug. I've got this. I've got my ebook. Ebooks is the next one. I stole my own thunder. Then after that is a service called Patreon. Patreon's super powerful. Patreon is a platform that you can quote unquote give to the arts. So if you like ever watch like an old movie, and there would be like the poet in the street, and he'd like do some poetry, and like people would give him like a coin, or like the guys playing like music downtown, and they've got their hat or a bucket out, and you just throw like some money in there. That's what Patreon is, but in a digital world. So you're like, yeah, really, your message is really important. In the mainstream media, like laughs at you or mocks you. You know what? It's worth $5 a month from me. Just go ahead and take it out of my credit card. Along with the other 400,000 of your subscribers, it's a lot of money. You can start to do some really cool stuff or uncool stuff. Sponsorships. So the person who was kind enough to share those ad metrics with me, he actually has a channel, and so that was like a slow month for him. He made $200 off of the revenue share in YouTube. So in sponsorship, though, he'll go to a sponsor and say, hey, I'll make this video about you guys. And so I'll give you like a 5-minute spot. I'll work you into my content. But I want $1,500. You get one sponsor, $1,500 in a month. Now you're making a living at this. Now you're like quitting your job wherever, and you could do this full time. And I know people that do this full time. And so if you're doing hate speech and you want to create a movement, You're not like throwing tiles on the ground in Washington, D.C. to have it kind of figured out 20 years later. Not doing like this horribly typewritten newsletter. You're not like renting a hall and convincing the person you're not a hate speech kind of guy and getting your reservation canceled, which happens to a lot of hate groups. You've got a fantastic platform, and because if you guys were here last week, we talked about First Amendment rights. Facebook and YouTube are like, well, we don't want to prohibit free speech, and lately they've cracked down a little bit on it. And I'm based on what Circle of Peace does, I kind of like the stuff. I don't like the stuff out there. I don't condone taking it down unless it gets to those places where it's downright dangerous. And the kind of the final phenomena is something called super chats. And so super chats are live chats on the side of a YouTube video. So you'll be watching a YouTube video and you will have a live chat on the right side. And so people are usually yelling at each other. Trying to think of an example, like there's a couple of news channels that'll do it, so you can actually like yell at each other. But you can do something called a super chat, and if you really love what the show is doing, you can push a button, and if you have your Google account tied to like a credit card, you can kind of do like a Patreon thing in the live chat. And I've actually sat in these chats, and I've seen it go up to like $100, $200. There's it's interesting. There's a lot of movements out there. There's like lately there's like the flat Earth movement. There's a group of folks who believe the Earth is flat, and 10 years ago we would have laughed at that. And now they have a following. I really think they're probably in the 100,000 plus range of people that today believe the Earth is flat, and they built their community using this methodology, and they've had their conferences, and they have their super chats, and they have their merchandise. And it's a pretty lucrative business. If I didn't have scruples, I'd be like, I don't really believe it, but man, work sucked today. I'll just do that. But I couldn't even get the slideshow working at the library. So this flat Earth movement, I would say born on YouTube. Didn't have to throw a single tile down in the subway or on a street. Booming. Kind of another. This is kind of like this is almost like pretty much my final slide, but this is a really interesting meme. And again, no Muslim here, take offense. I'm Muslim myself, so I get to, throw our people under the bus. But this is a powerful thing used. This is has anyone heard the word meme? Does anyone know what a meme is? It's actually really confusing because it's spelled M-E-M-E. And so like older folks are like, you kids with your memes. And it's not memes, it's memes. And my kids had to talk. I was like the old guy in that rendition of that discussion. They're like, Dad, it's not a meme. So, right, it's a powerful message. And so that's all a meme is. It's like it's a one-page thing. Like maybe in my generation we called it like a political cartoon, but they get like a lot more crazy than that. And so you see like Ilhan Omar's like the Trojan horse dragging Sharia law in, and the Democrats are the ones dragging the horse in. And you have America like welcoming Sharia law with open arms. In the same group that's kind of calling this out, not all of them, but a small percentage of them are the ones that are kind of like doing their own Sharia law and taking their religious views and imposing them on others. And so it's a fascinating time. And the library, when we first talked to the library about this, it was all about media literacy. What's really unfortunate is you can leave young people unattended in front of a computer, and you can end up in the wrong place. And it's as dangerous as being in the real world with like a license and car keys at like 5 years old or 10 years old. You can end up anywhere online. And it's not, when I first had kids, it was, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? There's like pornography and stuff. And I think some parents are like, let the pornography and stop that. I wanted to explain that stuff to them. And so it's a really powerful thing. And that's why that movement of old, I thought it took heart, it took soul. you had to be personally vested because that first stage of it, you were funding yourself. If you can not even have like a good idea or a good movement, and you can literally make a living at it. And I think the Flat Earth like society is like a perfect example of like how you can make a full-time living at this. And then to kind of wrap up all the folks that might get caught up in this, at the end of the day, we live in a country where we're going through hardships. There are parts of the country, you have the Rust Belt, they're going through hardship. And the best thing you can do to someone going through a hardship is to say, there's a lot of other people in this hardship, and it's not your fault. And I actually agree that it's not their fault. And so rather than them pointing their finger at like legislation or like big business practices where they're taking things out of the country, instead of pointing their finger there, sometimes it's not a finger, right? Yeah. They're pointing it at immigrants and Muslims and people that just look different or people that love different, and it's getting scary online. And then kind of a final idea is when you have these movements, if there is a politician or if there is a person that can stand to gain from this movement, and they throw like their kind of big company money behind something like this, disaster. So you can have a company who's like, oh, if we can get public hands out of the federal government's hands and maybe into the state hands, and the state kind of starts choking on the expenses of the state thing, and then they start like renting it out. Maybe I can extract minerals. Maybe I could do something. So it could be. So the ramifications are really deep. And at this point, other than meeting a person affected by hate speech one-on-one and literally just putting my hands up and saying, "Look, I would never do anything to harm this country," like the best scenario I've ever had out of that conversation is, well, you seem to be a good guy, but the rest of your people need to go. And it's a really tough thing. I think that's probably the best thing I've ever gotten out of it. Here, I put some of the inspirations of this, and again, it came out a little small because of my slide, but some of my ideas came from the Rural Organizing Project. This presentation will be online. The YouTube metrics that I provided were courtesy of Zabio Arts, which is a art tutorial website. And Resurrect Dead, The Mystery of the Toynbee Tiles, is something you have to check out because I would so love to give you like the whole story, but you'd hate me for spoiling it for you. Thank you guys. And any questions you have, let me know. We can do Q&A.
Srini, your presentation got me thinking about, okay, so given that this is the new methodology by which messages of hate or movements of hate are spread these days, it seems to require a whole new skill set, a whole new approach for how to counteract it. And the old school method of counteracting hate movements, whether that was some of the neo-Nazi groups that we showed in our presentation last week, or some of the other groups out there that seem to have a hateful message they're trying to spread, was more public education, more critical thinking in schools, more forums at the library where you get people talking about it. But what you're presenting is a picture of, you have big pockets of people who are isolated from the public sphere, countermeasures that the old school approach might try to use. So if folks are isolated in these pockets and they're talking to each other in an echo chamber, they're not hearing counter views for some of their underlying assumptions that motivate the hate narratives. What kinds of methods can a concerned citizen get engaged with where there's meaningful conversation going on, where there's an effective way of counteracting or poking through the bubble, so to speak?
Yeah, so It's a really good question. If anyone has the answer to that, let me know. It's actually interesting you bring it up. So there's a Muslim scholar out of Dallas, Texas, and he put together this thing where he Googled like Islam and Muslims, and I don't know the exact number, but it was like pages of really terrible stuff until you got to like one thing where it was like Muslims weren't like, you know, the end of the world. And so those algorithms by Google, and you know, a lot of people are like, you know, Google, they're evil. And I'm like, Google's maybe a little evil, but it's really math. And so the problem is like the hate sites just outnumber like good sites. So like one of the things one of the things he's doing is building websites where they're like, look, we'll answer all your questions. And the more he builds, like the more in the rankings in relevancy, like a Google search would put his content. And so like that's like one way is to, believe it or not, is like create content that's like to the contrary, which is, you know, it's like a different skill set, but it's getting easier to put content out there. So if it's a website, or even if you like take a talk like this and like throw it in like a Twitter, you know, like it might reach that person, but a lot of this will start with like a Google search. And so if you can kind of fix it at the Google search level, there's like hope. But other than that, it's like there's like a long way to go, because a lot of folks that would show up to a forum like this don't really need this message.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. So if you've never had anything happen to you personally, how are you supposed to empathize with it?
Exactly, and you know, it's even made worse as like I feel like in the U.S. like our lives are speeding up, and so even if you're a very empathetic person, and you're kind of like, well, I have my kids to feed, I got my car to fix, I got my bills to pay, and so even if you're like horrified by it, you don't even know where to go with it. So absolutely, you know, and I one time I want to like name one of these talks like, you know, Muslims are bad, and you know, like have a bunch of people show up like, that's not the name of the talk. Or gay people are evil, and then they come to the talk, I'm like, they're really not, you know, I don't know. So sorry, you had a question here.
Well, my question has to do, it's a follow-up with Michael's, because it seems like the problem is that, well, the problem is math, and so you get in a loop, and whereas we used to have a newspaper with an editorial page where editors would be very careful to present multiple points of view, you read your paper, you read those, and you can encounter all kinds of ideas and think, oh, I hadn't thought about that. The math and the algorithms, as they're currently set up, don't allow for any countering ideas. So the question I have is there any way, I mean, there's got to be a way, where part of a Google search or part of the responsibility of a platform like YouTube would be to pull in other points of view so that a person doesn't just get the searches that reinforce what they've already been looking for. So is that being discussed?
So that's actually really,
and is it possible?
yeah, so that's actually a really good point. And I'm not like a Google spokesperson. I just work in IT and ruin slideshows. But Google's actually, it's funny you mention that because they recently started doing that. But what's interesting is they kind of have to like figure out the math of that. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, so like in math, it's computer, it's like zeros and ones. So to kind of tie in like what is the opposite of this, they have to be able to like put it into their algorithm. And so they did some changes to the algorithm within YouTube. And I think it shoved like a lot of the stuff, like a lot of the hate stuff completely out. And so what's interesting is if you look at the rhetoric now, these like a lot of the hate groups are like, you know, we got to build our own platform because Google's censoring us. And so YouTube will adjust. So at one point in Google's, this is actually funny. At one point in Google's history, if you sold a product, and you were just like a nobody, and you're selling this product, you know, let's say you sold laptops, and you're like, come to my laptop site. We have great laptops. The laptops here are fantastic, and everyone who comes here loves the laptop they buy from the best laptop dealer. So that was called keyword stuffing. And so they would just shove like the word laptop. And so you go to websites, and you're like, who the heck wrote this thing? This is ridiculous. But they were like #1 ranked in Google, and it was some guy who sold computers out of like a basement. And you're like, I was trying to find IBM, but I guess this guy might be better because he keyword stuff. So Google like fixed that. And actually not only did they fix it, they started slapping people. They're like, if you keyword stuff, you will get removed from the algorithm. And so people are like, okay, don't do that. And I remember the first time I had a consultant look at some of the properties I was building, they were like, you're not putting enough keywords in there to match the thing. And I'm like, if it is not human readable, I'm not doing it. And I always thought like one day we will get slapped for this. And sure enough, like a bunch of websites like went away the next day. So they're actually doing that correction. And I hope it works, but it kind of overdid it. And now they're trying to like pull it back and get like a little bit of balance. But right now, if you look at the rhetoric, a lot of those guys are like, oh, they're censoring us. It's time to build our own platforms. Evil, you know, and even guys like that like are on the opposite side. They're not about hate speech. They're like, how could those guys put so much hate speech and, you know, Google's evil? And I'm like, in some regards they're not that great. But it really does come to the mass data. It cannot be curated by humans. You would have to have like a million people curate the data that comes through. It's got to be fully automated to be scalable. And that's the biggest thing, is it's got to be like robotic.
But also balanced.
But balanced as well, and you know, and robot. You know, it's funny is, and I saw you raise your hand. What's funny is we did this experiment in one of my classes. It was tell your teacher how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and so you had to do the instructions just perfect. And like on my set of instructions, the teacher opened the thing, and I was like, okay, now take the bread. And so they took the bread and mashed it into the cap because I did it wrong. And so you really understand that robot, you know. You've got to like break it down to the ridiculous level. Yes?
When I hear you talk about how everything can be traced to big data and metadata to your IP address.
Yes, and your persona. And there's like another thing called a persona.
So, one thought that I had is if everything comes to my IP address in my home, and we've got however many members in the family or whoever's there, I want to get that data. I want to see who's looking at what in my home, and then we can have a family dialogue about that and talk about that. Because, I mean, you can put your child watch on all those things, but you can't regulate everything that everybody's looking at. And so I want to know what's happening so that we can at least talk about it and figure it out. Is there a way for individuals to get that?
Yeah, so there's definitely like commercial software that does it. There's actually devices now. There's actually one, it was put up by Disney, and it was like a device that you could plug in to your, like in front of your router.
What's that called?
I could actually post it. I could actually post it in the minutes. You can do another thing. It's actually cheaper and free, and it's a project called OpenDNS. It's like so if you go to like opendns.org, it's a very simple way to have all of the requests leaving your home run through OpenDNS, and if DNS has it on like a category of specific sites, they actually won't let it come back in to the house. So you'll request it, and if you find it in Google and you click the link, it'll actually return like a null. You'll get like a blank page. And so it's like filtered at the www dot level.
So that you can filter it?
Yeah, and so the trick is you don't have like super granular control. And so it's got like categories. It's got like, you know, pornography, hate speech, technology on how to bypass OpenDNS is filtered. So it's like category. So sometimes you might end up, like you might be researching like hate speech, and then you like have to go and turn it off.
Yeah, I don't really want to turn things off and on. I'm not, maybe I should be more worried about what everybody's looking at, but I really just wanted to see what it is to have that conversation. So.
Yeah, so it's interesting is there's
Circle, wasn't it called Circle? The Disney
yes, it was the Disney Circle. Yeah, and so then you're talking about something that blocks it, but if you want to kind of see it, I will say that the router that comes from your internet service provider doesn't typically do that, but if you buy the more expensive ones, it does have that like logging. So it's like logging, so you can see where people are going.
And is it that kind of data that tells you how much time they spent, when they did it, when they viewed it, and how long?
At the router level, it's like where people went. It can't even really tie it to the person very well. The Apple, so if you're part of like the Android ecosystem, they're starting to do that for mobile devices. And in the Apple ecosystem now, there's like screen time. So you could not only limit the content, but you can even limit time. But it's still not focused towards content yet. And what's weird is it's really easy to filter content for like really bad stuff. Like pornography is really easy. You just, there's like 10 words you can filter against and you're good. But the hate stuff is a lot more subtle, like, oh, I was just doing research on the, Democratic Party or something, and just end up in the wrong place. Yes?
So, back in the days when South Africa was being boycotted, there were certain companies that, we knew were doing business there, and we could exercise some degree of economic leverage on them by saying, we're not going to buy your products unless you get out of South Africa. So what I hear you saying is people who have their own right-wing movements monetize it by virtue of being on YouTube, and then somebody is paying for advertisements that are be seen coexisting with that. Is there any way of sort of figuring out who those people are and exercising economic leverage on them as a means of squashing the ability to fund this stuff?
So that's a really good point. So with that whole thing with like Pepsi probably won't put their ad on hate speech. So Google even started doing what's called demonetization of the content. So there are actually a lot of the hate speech channels now that don't do any of the ad revenue share with YouTube. But if you've built that, I should go back. If you've built that platform, if you've built that platform, now you can actually use sponsorships. So for instance, like Alex Jones, again, I wanted to say very nonpartisan, but Alex Jones I don't think is part of any Democratic or Republican Party at all. He's way out there. So he actually sells like a line of vitamins, and he's like, if you're going to fight the New World Order, you need energy, and if you need energy, you should buy my vitamins. And so they actually create products for like their viewership. And again, it comes back to that whole Patreon effect. We're like, you know what? I was buying Centrum. I'll buy his stuff because he's speaking the truth. And so like they're shifting like buying of regular stuff to these sites. So if you can get like a critical mass on your content, you can tell YouTube to just, hey, you can turn off monetization on your content and say, YouTube, don't look at my stuff. I'm not trying to have you put any ads on my site. I'll put my own ads on through sponsorship. The super chat probably wouldn't work, but then you can also do Patreon. So like maybe we'll just go like that in the order of you guys. So, and by the way, Dan is handing out like an evaluation form. So be sure to say like, Guy did not know IT. He's a fraud. Sorry, go ahead.
So, we're in an age where the volume of hate speech is escalating, like a hockey stick curve. But the counter narratives are actually declining. So we have this uneven situation where young people especially, I am not on any social platforms. I'm a dinosaur. But young people are being exposed almost on an exponential level to information where they have not had the exposure. They don't have the critical thinking skills, and they're younger and younger. How do we change this configuration of information so that we at least have a balance? And I believe this stuff has been under the surface for a very long time. This is not a new phenomenon. It's just been the pot's been boiling below the surface, and there has not been it's not been socially acceptable to be mean and hateful and uncivil. But now it is.
Right. And I'm not a teacher. I don't know what's worked in the like public school curriculum about this, but what's interesting is it needs to be, because like I know my kids, when they want to look at their like track scores, like when they compete, like it's all on like a site called athletic.net. And then the school has like a volunteer photographer, and so all the kids like get their picture on like the school's Facebook page. And so they're in there. I mean, so the school is saying, hey, if you want to see your pictures on Facebook. So they're condoning the use of Facebook. So I think they have to say, like, look, you're going into Facebook for like a school-related thing. Maybe we should teach you guys the signs, or to understand that what you read on the internet is vetted by no one. There's no vetting whatsoever, and that it's on you to take what you read and maybe go to a public library, ask the right questions, or get the books, or to find those resources online that counter that. But at least when hate speech kind of foils like a 25-year-old or 25-year-old plus, at least it was like a guy that was like of a rational age. But these kids, I mean, you could end up brainwashing them, at a very young age with this stuff.
But that's why I'm saying that if we can show the kid, I mean, these kids are smart. If you explain to them that they are being manipulated, and you can show it by what is fed to them, I mean, you need to bring that awareness up. That's why I want that information.
Telling them that they're being manipulated is not going to do it.
Well,
You have to have another mechanism.
I understand, yeah, but I just think that awareness is vital.
And junior high is too late. It needs to start in kindergarten, first and second.
Yeah. So there was a question, yes. So I was going to go that way and then forward.
So you mentioned the presentation being posted and the minutes being posted, and where will they be posted at?
So that's circleofpeaceonline.org. And I actually had it on one of my slides, but it's like really small because I messed up the slide. So,
Okay, so we can look for it there.
Yeah.
And then to make a comment to what she was saying about how do you explain this to your kids, I think kids these days are extremely intelligent. I think you give them the basics of what you just said there, and you take them to YouTube and you explain the situation. Isn't it kind of funny that when you go into YouTube and you listen to this song, the next time you come back in, it's showing you that song, and it also shows you songs that are similar, and that's marketing, and and just have that discussion with them, and they're going to get it.
And I think the teachers are doing that. I mean, my son's school, they're doing that. They're already
But
explaining
not
that.
the teachers. I mean,
No, I
that's a
know.
discussion that needs to happen at
At
home,
home.
Yeah.
and with your younger age. I mean, everybody needs to know that things are being marketed to you. It's about the dollar sign.
Yes.
Just quickly, I've never been to the Far East, to the Far East, to the Middle East. If you can address this, what environment are we talking about? Young people, in Syria we saw a lot of kids traumatized for a long period of time. I imagine every one of them had PTSD for the rest of their lives. But these kids that are in clans or towns for a long part of their life and influenced by the religion, the extreme of the religion. This discussion now is catering to an audience worldwide, we're talking about youth people worldwide, young people worldwide, that have more stability in their life, and they have other input into their day, into their ear. I'd love to hear you comment on those young people in particular that are hundreds of thousands or whatever the number is in these war-torn areas, including ISIS. I mean, how are we going to, if they're watching the move to and they're trying to form an opinion, how are we ever going to reach them?
So that's a great question. And ISIS's biggest recruitment tool was the internet, and I know that narrative that they use. They use the same narrative that's used for like extreme, like ultra right wing, neo-Nazi groups, and they're like, you guys have no idea. You are under attack. Anyone who's not Muslim wants you dead. So either kill them or be killed. And you are neglecting your religious duty by not standing up against these oppressors. And you hear this message enough, and again, you get into that echo chamber, and you get to the point where you're like, I think I'm disobeying God. And so again, the leader, like I hold the leaders accountable, but a lot of the followers, I think it's easy to hate, but a lot of the followers, I don't give them a full pass, but I have empathy for them. And so, sorry, to answer your question, I don't know. I think, that counter argument needs to be put out there. And I think, because these kids like maybe don't have parents, that guiding hand is the parents. And, and there's like this bigger macro economic issue that I see is like as the economy slows down, as the Rust Belt gets tougher to live in, like when I was a kid, it's like, oh, we've got 2 working parents. I'm like, 2 working parents would be great. Now we have like 2 working parents that are working 3 jobs apiece. How do you parent at that point? Sorry, hopefully I'm just trying to be fair. Phil.
Give us some reflection about the death of Papa in the ISIS community. Is that too much?
What's interesting is, it's funny, you can kind of watch the different news sources talk about it. And Muslims are probably the ones breathing the biggest sigh of relief, because Muslims were like the first people that al-Baghdadi like terrorized. I mean, his realm was like, you've got like Syria, you've got Iraq, and and you did have like the Yazidis, which are technically not Muslim, but they ran roughshod over these guys, and So I follow a religious person by the name of Hamza Yusuf Hansen. He's based out of Northern California, and he's like on the ISIS like top 10 assassination list. And so like Muslim, we're infidels to those guys, and so we don't win with them either. So it's a very so we like Muslims are breathing a sigh of relief too. I mean, there is not a tear shed by any faithful Muslim that I know.
Again, when you were talking, the reference you made earlier about talking to your little cousin, you had just returned from Egypt, right? Is where you were referring to your little cousins.
Yes.
And what's the sense of? The Arab Spring all across the Middle East and North Africa was using these kind of social media sites to start some revolutionary activity. So maybe not a lot of Americans don't realize how sophisticated some of the pockets around the Middle East or Northern Africa are in terms of their ability to use this kind of technology. But I'm just sort of curious, how similar is the picture that you presented here and the way it works on young American audiences similar to what your cousins in Egypt experienced?
That's a really good question. So here's what I saw. So this is like not like fact or textbook. This is what I see. As far as my family goes, you've got usually 2 parents. Egypt, it's still a society where you may only have 1 working parent. There's a lot of oversight on the internet, and the internet's kind of crappy there. It's like slow, and so you have to. So you're not going to be affected by like neo-Nazi things, and the pro-ISIS stuff is more for immigrant populations living in the West. So it's tailored towards them. They're like, if you're in America, you could be Muslim and you could like say the Pledge of Allegiance 1,000,000 times and they still won't accept you as being an American. You can stand under the flag and do all this stuff and still not be an American. And so they kind of in Egypt, people are comfortable with their religion and they're not really being oppressed within the society. So they're not subject to that. But what's interesting is, and I know, Dan, you're got your hand up. What's interesting, though, is like right now in Egypt, and if we put this on YouTube, I'll probably never be able to go back to Egypt, but there's a regime in charge right now that they've gotten to the point where you can't say anything about the leadership in Egypt whatsoever. And it used to be where the old president, the old regime, you could get away with murder online, and they used to just let it go. And then if you physically assembled, or you were throwing like tiles down on the street, you were in big trouble. Digitally, they left you alone. Now, I guarantee anyone in this room I could go to Egypt right now, type in the right thing in Facebook, and have people on my door 24 hours later. Guaranteed. Sorry, I don't know who is first. Is Dan or Arif?
Just a quick comment before anybody else leaves. That's what's prompting my comment.
Yes.
I think you'll find this worthwhile going on to 8 o'clock, just the Q&A that's going on. But a couple of things. We can also put on a sampling of Discovery Channel's Why We Hate series that just started a couple of Sundays ago. And so that's an option, as well as I wanted to comment on the 9 non-physical needs that if they're not met, here's the bad outcomes that can occur. We'll go into it in more detail in my session on November 18th, but it goes to educators, parents, and anybody else out there who has influence on our younger generations, the things to watch for, such as that sense of belonging, a sense of family, and so on, and what the negative outcome of isolationism and so on can lead to. So that's among the things to become more aware of. But keep it up. This is great. I just wanted to let you know there's
thank you.
options this evening until.
So we had Arif and then that. So let's go Arif and then you and then Angela.
Based on the question that was asked here about the people or the young children and how they're schooled, there's another segment of population, young population, that has no access to internet. Yet they are being brainwashed in the same way because of politically motivated religious speeches, ideologies, and you mentioned Muslims a number of times. I've seen Hindus as well. I've been to India and I've seen how things are happening, and India is starting to on the same path as the Muslims were like in 20, 25, 30 years ago. So we have to, as good citizens, we have to look after or uphold human rights and promote them across the world so that we can get people out of the basic, very, very poor conditions, and this happens over a long time, and then educate them and counter the narratives that are out there, whether they be on the internet or otherwise, and that's how I guess we can manage this issue. Otherwise, it's going to become a really big problem for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to share my frustration. I came tonight looking for issues around hate speech on the domestic level. And I don't think we've really touched on white nationalism, white supremacy, to the extent that we should. And we have in this country a huge blind spot about the hate of hatred that is exhibited towards people who are minorities, who don't believe the same way, and I think I appreciate and understand that a lot of people are concerned about Islam and how it affects the world. But if we don't get our own act together and deal with the hatred that exists in this country, hatred of Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, women, people who are, we're just really going to be going down, excuse me, the big shithole in the sand.
No, I totally agree, and it's tricky, and hopefully what this will do is, like hate against any group, like we could see, the signs and, maybe inoculate. But you're right. I would love. I could give like a whole other talk. If you check out the link, it was like it's rop.org. ROP.org has a 125-page PDF called Up in Arms. It is the most fascinating read I've had in a long time, and it takes that white nationalist movement with its start with like the civil rights movement. It goes into like the Aryan Brotherhood, and I won't give it away, but it's interesting is that they're actually sloughing off the neo-Nazi stuff in the Aryan Brotherhood to make it more palpable to like just regular Americans. And so and then you have tendrils coming off where it's really watered down, but that foundation is still the same. It's kind of the same rot. And it's happened. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I could take that and easily do a whole, probably 2 hours on that. And I kind of insinuated some things. I would love to bring those to light, and also at the same time keep it nonpartisan, because I wanted this to be. I didn't want anyone to, Democrat, Republican, Independent. I didn't want anyone to feel like I was, because even saying right wing, I should caveat and say like ultra rabid right wing.
And Charlottesville was a prime demonstration of that rehabilitation of that particular mindset and philosophy. Because if you can close your eyes and think, look back you don't see neck tattoos much. You see, they're wearing ISOC shirts. They're dressed, they have hair on their heads, you know. So they're working very hard to reacculturate themselves.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm going to do honor system, and whoever thinks they're next, just go.
Okay. Thanks. Well, just a couple of things. One, I can speak for Circle of Peace in how we decided to present this. Hate speech is a huge topic. So one of the things we really wanted to do was have an area that we could focus on. So last week was all about looking at the First Amendment and how constitutionally hate speech works. This is a way to understand better how social media and technology feeds it. And we just assume that if we can take a look at this, we can all be more empowered to know how to respond, because if we know how the system is manipulated, that gives us power in responding. And the thing I wanted to say, more importantly, and this was the point I had, I was hearing questions coming up, like, how are students, how are young people being taught about this in schools? And I can just say, as a school librarian involved with the whole PLC or professional learning community with fellow librarians, it's absolutely on the radar. Every librarian in Vancouver is tasked with helping to teach digital literacy. There's a whole series of state standards that have been set up and passed by the state of Washington 3 years ago. More and more, we are trying to integrate this within classroom lessons so that young people do understand how it works. Understanding the capitalism behind hate speech is a piece of that. And then also, if any of you are interested in working with kids in your own lives, there's a website called commonsensemedia.org that has fantastic resources to work with for education, and then also just reviewing movies and books to get a sense of what's age appropriate. So there's a lot going on with young people on every front.
Common sense what?
commonsensemedia.org.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes, Justin.
So just to piggyback on what Angela is saying, a lot of the topic tonight is about information literacy at its heart. Looking at, evaluating, and trying to make sense of multiple points of view into a single issue. One of the things, and here's the somewhat shameless plug for Vancouver libraries and the work that we are trying to do with our school districts, is that we are working with every school district that we serve, which is 23 across our district, 4 counties, to provide every student with access to all of our electronic resources virtually with their student ID number. And the reason I bring this up is that some of the resources that we have, that we subscribe to on all of our behalf, that you have access to right now if you have a library card, are one that I'm thinking about in particular is called Opposing Viewpoints in Context. And it is essentially a news aggregator that gives all of us multiple perspectives or angles into a single story. There's another one called History in Context. So these are places that I steer my children to, that I steer students that I work with towards on the internet that will help them hopefully evaluate with some critical thought what's happening in the world around us.
And I could just say I taught philosophy and figured knowledge at Columbia River High School, as well as literature and English there, and I use the Opposing Viewpoint series regularly, and it's really an excellent resource. So I would encourage you, if you're a parent or a grandparent and you find yourself talking around a topic, maybe hate speech or something similar to that, and you're looking for an excellent database of information, the Opposing Viewpoint series, the Opposing Viewpoints in Context, really nicely lays out how you see the spread of information. Justin, do you want to say anything about all points, or the one that's linked through Living Room Conversations?
Through the Living Room Conversation, no, I'm not familiar with that one off the top of my head.
Did you say living room conversations?
Yeah, for one of the sites that we linked to last Monday, off of our resources page, was the Living Room Conversations page on hate speech, and there's an all-site, there's a link there where they have another service that presents topics from a variety of sources. I'll see once they're done talking about this, see if I can pull it up and show it to you.
No.
What's this?
What he's bringing up here is the Discovery Channel series that just started that Steven Spielberg's involved in. It's called Why We Hate.
Oh, we won't run it.
So
Yeah, we won't run it.
discovery.com/why
No, no.
we hate. You don't have to have Discovery Channel on your TV at home or anything of that nature. You can go directly to the website. They're on their third and I think a 10 segment series. And it is pretty enlightening, eye-opening, and it goes into many aspects. The second one was tribalism, which we've touched on last week and this week. So I didn't mean to stray from that. The Living Room Conversations is just one of many, like Better Angels initiatives out there that are trying to get the conversation going and show that we can have a civil and constructive conversation without killing one another. And that's the basic underlying message of all of this. There's also Crossing Party Lines and another initiative, there's a chapter in Portland. If you go to meetup.com, you'll find Crossing Party Lines as among the more obvious titles of a group that will resonate with the sentiments in this group here.
Resources are at your website, the sheet you handed out last week, and it updates, is that the website?
I think it's at the...
Yeah, we'll show you where that's at right now.
At the circleofpeaceonline.org website. That's the website.
So do you want to try that? You know, the interesting thing talking about media literacy in the library is I sat in on a meeting of the Friends of the Woodland Library, and there's actually a big push. Again, when communities get tighter on cash, there's actually a big push to not allow the library system into the city of Woodland. And the argument is, well, the kids have the internet now. So it's amazing. So those.
Let's get rid of libraries.
Yeah, literally, they're like, we'll pay well, they're saying like, because we're part of Cowlitz County, we'll pay like the $5 or whatever to get a library card. And so literally there's like fundraising going on to try to circumvent this idea that like the internet replaces a library. It's just a horrifying, I mean, you could just take the flat earth movement and just use that as like, it's like Exhibit A, flat earth movement. I rest my case. Yes?
I come from out east from Ohio, and there is this program, it's not a program, but this movement, it's been around for a little over 10 years now. It's called Neighbor Up Event. And it's essentially where people in neighborhoods gather together, share a meal, and it's very relaxed but very structured. And it encourages people to break into smaller groups and discuss topics that are brought up by individuals at this event. And but one of the things that they emphasize, excuse me, one of the things they emphasize is face-to-face. And I'm hearing a lot of the digital connection, which is great. I'm old school. Face-to-face, phone, then text or email.
Yes.
That order. But it seems that there's more of a move towards the digital connecting rather than the face-to-face, even within families. And that scares me because it's that face-to-face that people learn to hold these conversations, to practice them, to engage. And it's sad when it's literally falling on teachers and librarians alone, almost exclusively in today's world. But there is a way, it's just the emphasis is so strong with the digital version of connection now, and that's disconcerting to me.
No, absolutely, and I think the idea too, not directly spoken by me, but was to kind of say, to question what's online and go to the real world to get your answers, like the library or parents. But that's the problem too, is that these kids, they've got this stuff like under their blanket and like with an iPad or an iPhone. I'd always been one of those parents like, my kids will never have a mobile phone, and their school, they get their assignments on it, and they communicate with when they coordinate. Like my kids were in drama, like the drama chat was like how they coordinated like the play stuff outside of school. And so it's like how to use this tool, but then like our messaging is stop here and go to the real world to get your answers. And you're absolutely right. And even face to face, I actually struggle against like that, like the hate speech. Like I can have that guy right in front of you. And I'm like, I was like, I don't know how to explain to you that like no person in this country is trying to sink the ship they're in. And it's just like insanity. I mean, no one is like coming in as an immigrant to like destroy America. As a matter of fact, they would have loved to not have to have left home to begin with. And they just had no choice in the matter. And I actually, in my times in Egypt, I ran into Syrian refugees, and and they're like, man, if we could just go back. And what's funny is, even though it's a nightmare hellscape, they're actually going back. They're like, I'll just deal with it. And I'm just shocked. But then again, I've left the U.S. for years at a time, and I land very comfortably, my parents are like, oh, stay with us, here's the car, here's money, whatever you need. And the first thing on my mind is like, I don't really want to just go back home. The internet here sucks. It's really slow. And you can ask anyone in Egypt, they're like, what was his main complaint about Egypt? And they're like, yeah, the internet. It's so true. So no, I absolutely agree 1,000% with you. It's got to be like, stop here, go to the real world, get your answers there. And then maybe you can come back with like the stuff we taught you, and then you can see truth and fiction. I don't want to keep you guys here all night. Like we can just break up anytime.
Do you mind if I just walk them through?
Yeah, go for it. There's one question in the back, and then if you want to do that.
I just had a comment. I saw a documentary last February called Resurrection that was created by a Lebanese female attorney. And it is about the children of the world that have really been tossed on this scrap heap. And one of the main takeaways from this was that we, right now, are creating someplace between 30 and 50 million children with no sense of allegiance to anything. They don't have a sense of family. They haven't been properly educated. They've had to dig in the dumpsters or the garbage pits for their food. They've run like, in many cases, like wild animals. And the majority of them are refugees. Some of them are orphans, but orphans and refugees. But this is worldwide, not as much in the United States. Mostly third world. But we are creating this group of really angry kids. That they're right now between 6 and 10 years old, and in 10 years we're going to have this to deal with, and a lot of them are being influenced by hate.
Yeah. And Michael's going to show us something, but real quick, kind of like to add on to what you said. What's interesting is these hate groups in America, like the issues like affecting their communities. Like I grew up in Northern Virginia, and I know just west of me, and not West Virginia, but like Western Virginia, those youth out there got obliterated with the opioid epidemic. The book Dope Sick, it's all about like my home state of Virginia. And I'd love to say like, hey, you know what, terrorists, Muslims, gays, Latinos, invasion, you guys could have a full-time job working on the opioid epidemic in your backyard. That's killing all your brothers and sisters. 1,000,000 times like more threat to you than anything outside of America. I would love to have just directed that anger, at just something simple like that. And the handful of I won't call them activists, like volunteers that are working on the opioid epidemic in those regions, it's like they're like spitting, they're like shooting spitballs at tanks. I mean, these guys get the prescriptions, and it's like a mom. It's not like that drug user, scary person in the movies. It's a mom who hurt her back. She ends up on opioids. She's like, I can't handle being sick when I get off the opioids. And my prescription ran out. I found a guy who sells heroin. It gave me the same comfort. And I just wish, like you said, like these angry kids. I was like, if you want to get angry about the stuff that actually affects you. Like, you know what? Be angry at whatever party, like, allowed, American businesses to, like, ship this stuff out of the country and still be treated as an American company. That's just devastating. Yeah.
So just to make sure you have resources you can take away tonight. So circleofpeaceonline.org is where you can find this. And the recent posts on the right-hand side, the very first, in the first session that we did last week is linked here, and that's what pulls up this right here, part 1 of 3. And the resources page link has all the resources that we shared last week, and one of those is living room conversations, free speech, and fighting words. That's what brought up this tab right here. The resource that's pretty helpful is called All Sides, that I was trying to find the name for earlier. So if you click on this, I'm not going to take you there now, but they have a really good site that shows you on all sorts of topics a variety of opinions similar to the one that Justin was talking about earlier. Okay, so those are where you can get those resources. And I'm sorry, Dan, the page that you had here kind of disappeared. I couldn't right-click and pull it up. But the name of the series again is just called
Why We Hate.
Why We Hate, and it's
discovery.com/whywehate.
Okay.
Yeah. And so everything I discussed we'll have up there soon after I fix the slides. I'm gonna have to call someone, but. All right. Well, I don't want to hold anyone up, but if anyone wants to throw anything else out, you feel free. Thank you.